The echo of gunshots faded into the Montana Territory night as Cassidy Harlow stood in the ashes of what was once her family home, tears streaming down her face despite her determination not to cry. It was 1879, and life in the Montana wilderness had never been easy, but watching everything she'd worked for go up in flames at the hands of Victor Blackstone, a ruthless businessman who wanted her land, was more than she could bear. "Miss Harlow?" A deep voice called from behind her. She didn't need to turn to recognize the voice of Preston Ryder, the tall, rugged cowboy who had recently arrived in Whispering Pines. She'd seen him at the general store, heard whispers about his skill with horses and his mysterious past, but they'd barely exchanged more than pleasantries until now. "Mr. Ryder," she acknowledged, wiping the tears from her dirt-smudged face as she turned to face him. "What brings you out this way?" "I saw the smoke," he said, his hat in his hands, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "When I heard it was your place—" He trailed off, his green eyes surveying the devastation. What happened? Cassidy's fingers clenched into fists at her sides. "Blackstone happened. He burned my house," she said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to sound strong. "Said if I wouldn't sell to him, I'd have nothing to stay for." Preston's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the still smoldering ruins of the modest cabin. "Then I'll build you one," he said firmly, meeting her gaze, "one strong enough to last." "Why would you do that?" "You barely know me," Cassidy challenged, suspicious of his offer despite the warmth it kindled inside her. "Because it's the right thing to do," Preston replied simply, "and because Blackstone's been pushing folks around for too long. Someone needs to take a stand." Cassidy studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I don't have much money to pay you." "I'm not asking for any," Preston said. "Just a meal when I'm working, and maybe some of that apple pie Mrs. Jenkins says you make better than anyone in the territory." Despite everything, Cassidy felt a smile tug at her lips. Deal. The first rays of dawn found Preston already at Cassidy's property, his wagon loaded with tools and supplies. He'd spent the night in the barn, which had been spared from the fire, and was measuring out the foundation when Cassidy arrived with a basket of food. "You're here early," she said, setting down the basket. "Daylight's precious," Preston replied, looking up from his work. "And we've got a lot to do before the first snow." "We?" Cassidy raised an eyebrow, her chestnut hair glinting in the morning light. Preston stood, dusting off his hands on his worn jeans. "Unless you don't want to help. This is your home we're building, Miss Harlow." "Cassidy," she corrected him. "And of course I'll help. I'm no stranger to hard work." Preston nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I never doubted that, Cassidy." For the next 2 weeks, they worked from sunrise to sunset, cutting lumber, laying the foundation, and raising the frame of what would become Cassidy's new home. Preston proved to be not only skilled with horses but also with carpentry, his strong hands shaping wood with precision and care. One evening, as they sat on the partially finished porch eating a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Cassidy found herself studying Preston's profile in the fading light. "Where did you learn to build like this?" she asked. Preston was quiet for a moment. "My father was a carpenter back in Pennsylvania. Taught me everything I know before he passed." "And what brought you west?" His expression darkened slightly. "Same as many, I suppose. A fresh start." Cassidy sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. They all had pasts they'd rather not discuss. She knew that better than most. "What about you?" Preston asked, turning the conversation. "Your parents? I notice you manage this place alone." Cassidy stared into the distance. "They died of fever 3 winters ago. Left me the homestead and not much else. But it was enough." "You've done well with it," Preston observed, his gaze taking in the well-tended fields and the small orchard beyond. "It's all I have," Cassidy said softly. "That's why I can't let Blackstone take it." Preston's hand moved, almost imperceptibly, toward hers, before he seemed to think better of it. He won't, he promised. Not while I'm here. The next day, as they were setting roof beams, the sound of approaching horses broke the rhythm of their work. Cassidy shaded her eyes against the sun to see 3 riders approaching, Victor Blackstone in the lead. Trouble, she muttered to Preston, who climbed down from the roof to stand beside her. Blackstone reined in his horse, eyeing the progress on the house with obvious displeasure. "Seems you found yourself a handyman, Miss Harlow," he sneered, his eyes flicking to Preston. "What do you want, Blackstone?" Cassidy demanded, standing tall despite the fear curling in her stomach. "Just checking on my future property," Blackstone replied smoothly. "You're putting a lot of work into a house that won't be yours for much longer." Preston stepped forward, his posture relaxed, but his eyes hard. "Miss Harlow's not selling." Blackstone's attention shifted fully to Preston, his lips curling in a cold smile. "And who might you be, Cowboy?" "Preston Ryder." Recognition flickered in Blackstone's eyes. "Ryder. I've heard that name. Weren't you the one who had some trouble down in Wyoming? Something about a man ending up dead?" Cassidy glanced at Preston, whose face had gone carefully blank. "That's all settled now," Preston replied evenly. "And it has nothing to do with Miss Harlow's property." Blackstone chuckled. "Everything in these parts has to do with me, Ryder. You'd do well to remember that." He turned his attention back to Cassidy. "My offer still stands, but not forever. Think about it, Miss Harlow. A woman alone can face many unfortunate accidents out here." With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, Blackstone turned his horse and rode away, his men following close behind. "What was he talking about?" Cassidy asked once they were gone. "Wyoming?" Preston sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's a long story." "We've got time," Cassidy said, crossing her arms. Preston looked at her for a long moment before nodding. "I was working on a ranch in Wyoming. The owner's daughter and I, well, her father didn't approve. There was a fight. Her brother pulled a gun, and in the struggle, it went off." His voice grew quiet. "He didn't make it. I was cleared of any wrongdoing, but the whispers followed me, so I moved on." Cassidy absorbed this, studying Preston's face. "And the daughter?" "Married a banker within the month," Preston said with a rueful smile. "Turns out her affections weren't as strong as I thought." "I'm sorry," Cassidy said softly. Preston shrugged. "Don't be. It led me here, didn't it?" His eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. The moment was broken by a loud crack as one of the roof beams shifted. They both jumped into action, returning to the work at hand, but something had changed between them, a new understanding, a deeper trust. As October gave way to November, the house took shape, a sturdy 2-room cabin with a stone fireplace and the promise of more rooms to be added in the spring. Preston had insisted on building it stronger than the original, with double thick walls and a sloped roof that would shed the heavy Montana snows. They fell into an easy routine, working together during the day and sharing meals in the evening. Sometimes Cassidy would read aloud from one of her books, or Preston would tell stories of his travels. Other nights they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. It was during one such evening, as they sat by the fire Preston had built in the new hearth, that Cassidy finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why are you really helping me, Preston?" He looked up from the piece of wood he was whittling, his expression thoughtful. "At first, it was like I said the right thing to do, but now—" He set down his knife. "Now I'm helping because I can't imagine being anywhere else." Cassidy's heart quickened at his words, but before she could respond, a gust of wind rattled the windows, bringing with it the first snowflakes of winter. "Snows early this year," Preston observed, moving to the window. Cassidy joined him, their shoulders almost touching as they watched the white flakes swirl in the darkness. "The house isn't finished yet. The essentials are done," Preston assured her. "Roof, walls, fireplace, the rest can wait until spring." Cassidy nodded, aware of his proximity, of the warmth radiating from him. "Where will you go when it's done?" she asked, not looking at him. Preston was quiet for so long that she finally turned to meet his gaze. "I was thinking I might stay in these parts," he said carefully, "if there's reason to." Their eyes held, and Cassidy felt something shift between them, like the earth settling into place after a long journey. "There might be," she whispered. The blizzard that hit the following week was the worst in living memory, according to old Mrs. Jenkins at the general store. Cassidy and Preston had barely managed to stock enough supplies before the town was cut off by drifts higher than a man's head. Trapped together in the new cabin, they settled into a different kind of routine, Preston tending to the animals in the barn, Cassidy cooking and mending, both of them working on finishing the interior of the house. The close quarters should have been awkward, but instead, they found a rhythm, a dance of movement and words and silent understanding. One evening, as a particularly fierce gust of wind howled outside, Preston looked up from the chair he was crafting to find Cassidy watching him, her eyes soft in the firelight. "What is it?" he asked. She shook her head slightly. "I was just thinking about how different this winter is from what I expected. A month ago, I was sleeping in the barn, thinking I'd lost everything." Preston set down his tools. "And now?" "Now I'm starting to think maybe I found something instead." Preston crossed the room slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. She didn't. When he stood before her, he reached out, tentatively brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Cassidy," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need you to know that I'm not just passing through what I feel for you." She cut him off by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his, a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, as if he could shield her from all the harshness of the world. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you told me about Blackstone burning your house," he admitted. Cassidy laughed softly. "That's a strange moment to fall in love with someone." "Not really," Preston said, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You were standing in the ashes of everything you'd lost, and all I could see was your strength. How could I not fall in love with that?" Cassidy's response was to kiss him again, her heart fuller than she'd ever thought possible. The snow kept them isolated for nearly 3 weeks, a cocoon of white in which their relationship blossomed. By the time the trails cleared enough for travel, they had come to a decision they would face whatever came next together. The first test of that resolve came sooner than expected. As soon as the roads were passable, Preston rode into town for supplies, returning with troubling news. "Blackstone's been busy while we were snowed in," he told Cassidy as he unsaddled his horse. "He's convinced the territorial judge that this land should be part of his mining claim. There's going to be a hearing next week." Cassidy's face paled. "He can't do that. I have the deed." "Deeds can be challenged," Preston said grimly, "especially when money changes hands." "Then we'll fight him," Cassidy declared, her jaw set with determination. "This is my land, and I'm not giving it up." Preston nodded, pulling her into an embrace. "Our land now," he corrected softly. "If you'll have me." Cassidy looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Is that a proposal, Preston Ryder?" He smiled down at her, his heart in his eyes. "Not a very good one. I always imagined doing it properly, with a ring and—" She silenced him with a quick kiss. "Yes," she said simply, "whatever comes, we face it together." The day of the hearing dawned clear and cold. Cassidy wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the warmth in her eyes, while Preston looked uncommonly formal in a clean shirt and vest, his gun belt conspicuously absent in deference to the courtroom. The town hall was packed with curious onlookers, most of whom fell silent as Cassidy and Preston entered. Blackstone was already there, smug in his expensive coat, flanked by his lawyer and several of his men. Judge Monroe, a stern-faced man with a reputation for fairness, called the hearing to order. Blackstone's lawyer presented their case first, arguing that Cassidy's land was part of a larger mining claim that predated her family's homestead. When it was Cassidy's turn to speak, she stood tall, her voice steady despite her nerves. My father was granted this land legally by the territorial government in 1870. We have worked it, improved it, and made it our home. It belongs to us by right of law and by right of labor. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Do you have documentation, Miss Harlow? Cassidy's heart sank. The deed was in the house when it burned. Blackstone's lawyer jumped on this. Convenient that the only proof of ownership was destroyed, isn't it? Not when your client is the one who set the fire, Preston interjected, his voice cold with controlled anger. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and the judge banged his gavel. Order. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Ryder. And a true one, came a voice from the back of the room. All heads turned to see Sheriff Thomas making his way forward, a folder in his hand. I've been investigating the fire at the Harlow place, and I've got 3 witnesses who saw Blackstone's men leaving the area just before the blaze was spotted. Blackstone's face darkened. This is absurd. You can't. I also took the liberty of wiring the land office in Helena, the sheriff continued, handing the folder to the judge. They sent a copy of the original deed and homestead grant for the Harlow property. It's all there, signed and legal. The judge examined the documents carefully, then looked up, his expression grave. It appears, Mr. Blackstone, that your claim is without merit. Furthermore, I'm deeply troubled by these arson allegations. Blackstone rose to his feet, his face contorted with rage. This is a mistake. I have powerful friends. Not powerful enough to put you above the law, the judge interrupted. Sheriff, I believe you have some questions for Mr. Blackstone regarding the fire at the Harlow property. As the sheriff moved toward Blackstone, the businessman made a desperate lunge for the door, shoving people aside in his haste. Preston moved to intercept him, but one of Blackstone's men drew a gun, causing the crowd to scatter in panic. Put it down, Preston commanded, his hands held open at his sides. You don't want to add murder to arson. The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Preston and his boss, who was nearly at the door. He's not worth hanging for, Preston continued, taking a careful step forward. Blackstone would leave you to take the fall. Something in Preston's words must have struck home because the man slowly lowered his weapon. In that moment of distraction, Sheriff Thomas tackled Blackstone, bringing him crashing to the floor. Victor Blackstone, you're under arrest for arson and attempted fraud, the sheriff announced, cuffing Blackstone's hands behind his back. As the sheriff led Blackstone and his henchmen away, the tension in the room gradually dissolved. Cassidy rushed to Preston's side, her eyes wide with relief and residual fear. That could have gone very badly, she breathed, her hands gripping his arms. Preston pulled her close, not caring who was watching. But it didn't. It's over, Cassidy. Your land is safe. Our land, she corrected, echoing his earlier words. The following Sunday, with the first hints of spring warming the air, Cassidy Harlow became Cassidy Ryder in a simple ceremony outside their newly completed home. The entire town turned out for the celebration, eager to see the couple who had stood against Blackstone and won. I never thought I'd find happiness again after my parents died, Cassidy confessed, as she and Preston danced under the stars, the sounds of fiddles and laughter floating around them. I was just surviving. Preston's hand tightened on her waist. And now? She looked up at the house they had built together, solid, strong, built to last, then back at the man who had helped her rebuild more than just walls and a roof. "Now I'm living," she said, rising up to kiss him as their friends and neighbors cheered. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. With Blackstone in territorial prison, the tension that had gripped the area began to ease. Preston and Cassidy expanded their homestead, adding a larger barn and fencing in more pasture for the horses Preston raised and trained. One crisp October evening, exactly 1 year after the fire that had destroyed her old home, Cassidy sat on the porch with Preston, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" she asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "If the fire had never happened?" Preston was quiet for a moment, his arm warm around her. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember what my father used to say, that sometimes we have to lose everything to find what we're really looking for." Cassidy smiled, placing his hand over the slight swell of her belly, still barely noticeable beneath her dress. "Well, I think we found something pretty special." Preston's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Cassidy, are you—" She nodded, her eyes shining. "Come spring, this house is going to need that extra room we've been talking about." Preston let out a whoop that startled the horses in the pasture, then swung Cassidy up in his arms, mindful of her condition. "I love you, Cassidy Ryder," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, cupping his face in her hands, "for helping me build a life strong enough to last." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they stood together in the doorway of their home, not just a house of wood and stone, but a place built on love, trust, and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to dream of before finding each other in the ashes of loss and the hope of new beginnings. In the years that followed, the Ryder homestead became known throughout the territory for its hospitality, its fine horses, and the unshakable bond between the couple who had built it. Their family grew first with the birth of their son Thomas, named for the sheriff who had helped save their land, and later with a daughter they called Emma, after Preston's mother. The house expanded too, with new rooms added for the children and eventually a proper kitchen, where Cassidy's famous apple pies cooled on the windowsill, their scent drawing neighbors from miles around. But through all the changes, one thing remained constant: the strength of the love that had begun when a cowboy promised a woman who had lost everything that he would build her a home strong enough to last. And last it did, standing tall against the Montana elements, a testament to the promise kept and the lives forever changed by a fire meant to destroy, but which instead had sparked the beginning of something far more powerful and enduring than the man who had set it could ever have imagined.